Hi there, and welcome to the Jimbo Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Well, we're here. We've had Thanksgiving, we've had Black Friday, we've had Cyber Monday, which is now wrapping up, and all that holiday stuff is upon us. And among that holiday stuff is that time of year when it is brought to your attention that you really should think about giving back. You really should think about charity. You should really think about tax deductions. Well, let's keep it altruistic for the moment, shall we? But the fact is that it's an activity that occurs at this time of the year. And we used to think of it, I guess, as that most benign and warm and fuzzy activity. But, of course, harsh reality has crept into even this, and we've discovered that not always do we give money to what we think we may. Hence our guest tonight, Doug White, who is one of the leaders of the philanthropic community. He's been that for over 25 years. He's been a consultant on fundraising and organizational development with charities of all types and all sizes. And he has now written Charity on Trial, What You Need to Know Before You Give. And that is published by Barricade Books. Good to have you with us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So we are aware of the fact that sometimes giving can be risky, true?
It sure can. There's a lot of things that people really ought to know that they don't. However, we've had some rather major scandals in the last several years that have made people think twice before they give away their money.
We have indeed, and I suppose there's a name here that... Arimony?
I was going to say you're probably looking for William Arimony's name.
That's the one. Yeah, right, here we go. I had that marked here.
I think that's the beginning of this era of looking at charities as critically as we do.
As in fairness, I suppose it is also, on the plus side, the beginning of really big-time, major organized efforts to help people, which did help a lot of people. I mean, I know we're going to dig deeply into the downside there, but Mr. Arimony also had an upside, didn't he?
Oh, he was a tremendously talented man. He brought the United Way from almost nothing, that's relatively speaking, to something very great. He and Pete Rozelle got together, and the NFL companionship was fantastic. And so he brought the United Way to a level that they could not have imagined when he started several years before.
What went wrong?
What went wrong? It's probably not a unique story, but I would say greed, avarice, the temptation, and on top of that, no real control. Part of what I really talk about in this book is the role of boards at charities, and in that particular case, the board was asleep at the switch.
We're not talking priests here. There are no formal vows of poverty per se, but I must confess that I was rather surprised to see the figure, if I'm not mistaken, although I'm not looking at it, it stuck in my mind. I believe the figure of his compensation was $463,000 a year.
That's correct.
That's not a vow of poverty, is it?
No, and that's over a decade ago.
And again, it is over a decade ago. I am reminded of the fact that in context, I suppose, let's assume that he brought a lot to the table, which I think is fair to say. How much did United Way raise per year while he was making that kind of money?
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but many, many millions of dollars.
Many millions.
There's no question. In terms of the $400,000 being related to that, it's not an issue. In fact, the $400,000 really wasn't an issue. I know that you're surprised, and a lot of people are surprised at what CEOs at charities can make, but what was an issue there, I mean, the $400,000 was a problem, but what was worse that he really broke the law. He stole money from the United Way.
On top of that.
On top of that, yes. Yeah. He took these trips on the Concorde, the now defunct Concorde, and spent money in places where there was no United Way business. And so it went past the normal problem that a lot of CEOs even today are experiencing. He really broke the law, and he was sent to jail.
Mm-hmm. What was the immediate effect? I would assume that the way people usually are, I'm just guessing here, but my guess is that the effect was, all of a sudden, we've all discovered charity. The General Accounting Office of Congress has discovered charity. Congressional hearings have discovered charity. The 6 o'clock news has discovered charity. And we're going to beat it to death for a few weeks, and then everybody's going to go away because we've done that now. Is that roughly, that's what happens to most major stories that flare up. Is that what happened here?
You are pretty right about that. After the Arimony scandal, things died down. Although I do have to admit that a lot of the local chapters still are reeling from that era. A lot of the local chapters, which had nothing to do, by the way, with the arimony scandal at all, are in some way still today being punished by their publics, and they shouldn't be, because of the 400 charities, or I should say 400 United Ways out in the United States. Almost none of them. There are a few. One of those is in this town, Washington, D.C., that have had their own problems.
Well, in fact, you open up this Chapter 1, the United Way, with a quote, Bill Arimony did more to harm local communities than can be easily measured. That from the United Way of Central New Mexico on its website. Boy, that's pretty heavy. I mean, you might expect that from a harsh outside critic, but wow.
And that quote is there today.
Yeah. That's pretty remarkable.
A decade later.
You cover everything in here, and in fact, even a question that most of us wouldn't even have bothered to ask, but since you did, I will. What is a charity? I mean, the fact that you posed the question made me stop and say, it's a place you give money, and it goes to help the less fortunate, and I get a tax break. And let's face it, that's certainly part of the motivation. Wouldn't deny it for 1 minute. It's that time of the year. I'm already adding mine up. But therefore, to ask the question, I suppose there's more to it than that.
There really is. In fact, when I talk to people about what I do, some people say, well, I'm a charity. I need money. And in this country, a charity has become an organization that is recognized by two bodies. One is the IRS and one is the state in which the charity resides. Mm-hmm. It has to become a corporation or a trust or something like that in a legal form at the state level, and then it gets its tax exemption from the IRS. And right now there are almost better than 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States. Now, people use that number and they say, wow, it's growing. And it is growing, and it's probably growing too fast. But of that, about half, give or take, we don't really know, are those that raise money from the public. The others don't. Either they're foundations or they're not raising money at all or getting any money from the public.
Some of George H.W. Bush's famous 1,000 points of light, as it were.
Yes.
Let's say that, and this I would hasten to add, ladies and gentlemen, is extremely hypothetical. Let's say that on the spur of the moment I'd have decided to say, well, sounds like a good scam to me. Let's form the Jimbo1 charity. What would I have to do to meet the requirements to become an official, certifiable, give money to me and you can tax deduct it charity? Okay.
Well, I have to, at this point, tell you I'm not an attorney, so I just want you to know that no one should go out there and act upon my words
here.
Here.
We understand that.
And even if I were, that wouldn't be the good idea.
No.
In order to be a charity, you have to apply to the state as a corporate body, and you have to have a certain number of trustees. Most states require 3.
So I incorporate myself. I get 3 buddies, and they...
Yeah. Okay. And what you've just described, by the way, is not all that hypothetical. That has happened. Yeah. And the important thing, though, is to get your exemption letter from the IRS. And that can take about 9 months.
Okay, so what do I write to them and say, hi, I'm Jimbo1, you know me, I pay you taxes, I'm going to become a charity. What do I have to tell them?
Well, you know, it's funny you ask that because I'm going to give you an answer that's not quite straightforward, but I do mean it. What you have to tell them is not enough. The IRS, believe it or not, I feel is very, very lax on what they require from organizations that apply for charities. Now, a lot of charities who apply will not agree with that, but there are a lot of charities who just aren't fulfilling their mission. What you've got to tell the IRS is basically how you're structured and what you're going to do with these tax-deductible dollars, what you're going to do for society. And then they have this application. You can get that on the web, and you can do it pretty much without an attorney, although I would never recommend that, and then send it in, and then wait for 9 months.
I think that there is a great crying need among some of the people with whom I associate for a liquid refreshment. Any number of people I know who may go through a weekend and become extremely thirsty, and we're going to provide a fund so that some of the indigent drinkers may obtain some of the alcoholic libation which is necessary for the proper stabilization of their otherwise dreary lives.
I would suspect that you would not get very far at the
Well,
IRS
that's
level.
Encouraging to know, because it was a 2-part question which you anticipated, both A, what would I have to say, and B, what should I have to say. Okay, what? In other words, I would have to cite some kind of community need, and a real one, not just drinking buddies, and that I would be addressing in some way. In other words, I'm going to actually have to part with some of this money. So if I'm going to scam my way through here, I'm stuck with the unfortunate necessity of actually having to give some of it to charity. Is that not the case?
That is the case.
I have to declare that. Do I have to actually do it, or is there any follow-up on that?
Well, this is what I meant about the IRS. And I actually think this is a good body. They try hard. There are a lot of good people working in the exempt organization division. But they don't have the ability to follow up the way that you're describing.
So I could essentially fill out the form with a little bit of BS and take a chance, and the odds might not be too bad that they wouldn't actually catch any, shall we say, adjustments from the truth that I might have put down on paper. I might get away with it.
You're probably not as strange as I am, because I go to the IRS site and and look and see how many have been applied, how many charities have been applied for in any one year. A tiny, tiny, infinitesimally small fraction get denied. Of the hundreds of thousands that get approved every year, maybe 1,000 get denied.
On the other hand, I suspect that very few people would be as callously cynical as I just was, would they?
Very few would be as callously cynical, but throughout the callously, and then you've got a lot of people who are applying for charities.
Interesting. Well, all right, more to come here as we find out some of the ins and outs. We're going to take a look at charity and youth, which is the final section of this book, Charity on Trial, because we'd like to be as user-friendly as we possibly can be. Yes, charity and terrorism. We anticipated that little charge, and it's on page 97 of this book, Charity on Trial. Doug White knows what he's talking about here and touches all bases. We'll take a look at the Philanthropy Protection Act and a few other aspects of this whole notion of giving. Give till it hurts, but not that way. We would like it to only hurt maybe a little bit financially. It should not hurt from a sense of shame or a sense of being cheated or any of a number of other hurtful ways. Our guest, Doug White, the book Charity on Trial, and this is the Jim Bohannon Show. We're delighted to have you with us tonight. Bohannon Show being brought to you by Medicare. Open enrollment ends December 31st. We'll be back.